April 1989, Los Angeles. Sondra Locke steps out of her car after a long day on set, expecting the familiar comfort of the home she shares with Clint Eastwood. Instead, she finds the locks have been changed. Confused, she peers through the window. Her clothes and belongings are boxed up inside. The man she loved and collaborated with for over a decade has literally locked her out of their life. In that moment, a Hollywood fairy tale shattered. But to understand how Sondra Locke arrived at this dark turning point, we must rewind to a very different beginning, far from the spotlights of Hollywood. Before we pull back the curtain on this dark secret, I'd love to know, where are you all tuning in from? Get your favorite drink ready, get settled, and stay with me as we navigate the scandalous lives and tragic ends of the stars we thought we knew. The year was 1944, while American soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, and the world held its breath through the darkest days of World War II. A baby girl was born in the rural heartland of Tennessee. Her name was Sandra Louise Smith, and she entered this world on May 28th. Far removed from the thunder of cannons and the glamour of Hollywood spotlights. The small town of Shelbyville, nestled among the rolling hills of Middle Tennessee, was a place where dreams were measured in acres of farmland. Not in movie contracts or Academy Awards, this was an America of ration books and victory gardens, where families gathered around crackling radios to hear news from the front lines. In places like Shelbyville, life moved to the rhythm of church bells and harvest seasons. Young girls were expected to grow up, marry local boys, raise children, and never venture too far from the county line. The idea that a daughter of this soil would one day walk the red carpet at the Oscars seemed as fantastical as a trip to the moon. But destiny had other plans for little Sandra. Though not before leaving its first cruel mark upon her soul. Her father was a military man, a figure who should have represented strength and protection in a young girl's life. Instead, he became the architect of her first and deepest wound. He walked out on the family when Sandra was still young, abandoning his wife and daughter without looking back. In that single act of desertion, he planted a seed of pain that would grow into something far more complex as the years passed. The little girl with bright eyes and delicate features learned her first lesson about men and love before she even understood what those words truly meant. People leave. Trust is a luxury. And sometimes, the ones who are supposed to protect you are the very ones who hurt you most. Sandra's mother, Pauline, was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered family. Like so many women of her generation, she did what she had to do to survive. She remarried, and young Sandra took on her stepfather's surname, transforming from Sandra Smith into Sondra Locke. Her stepfather ran a construction company, providing the family with a modest but stable working-class existence. There was food on the table and a roof overhead. But the emotional scars of abandonment do not heal with material comfort alone. Growing up in that quiet Tennessee town, Sandra developed a survival mechanism that would serve her well in Hollywood, but cost her dearly in her personal life. She learned to conceal parts of herself, to present a carefully constructed facade to the world, while hiding her true feelings beneath the surface. This was not the behavior of a manipulative child, but rather the protective instinct of a wounded one. When your own father can walk away without a second glance, you learn quickly that vulnerability is dangerous. You learn to become whatever people need you to be, because being yourself was never quite enough to make someone stay. In high school, something began to stir within Sandra that set her apart from her classmates. While other girls dreamed of wedding dresses and white picket fences, she found herself drawn to the local theater. There was magic in those dusty stages, in the way you could become someone else entirely under the glow of the footlights. Her petite frame and intense focus caught the attention of local directors, and they recognized something special in this quiet girl from a broken home. She had a presence. She had depth. And most importantly, she had hunger. After school, Sandra found work at a local radio station. Her smooth southern voice, sweet as honey, but with an undercurrent of something more complex, proved perfect for reading commercials and dispensing teenage advice over the airwaves. It was her first taste of performance, of reaching an audience beyond the confines of Shelbyville. But it was merely an appetizer for the feast she craved, at night, while the rest of the town slept. Sandra would devour classic films with an almost religious devotion. She studied the way Bette Davis commanded the screen, the way Katharine Hepburn delivered her lines with razor-sharp precision. In front of her bedroom mirror, she practiced movie star poses, imagining herself draped in silk gowns and surrounded by adoring fans. Her surroundings may have been humble, but her imagination roamed far beyond the Tennessee hollows that had cradled her childhood. She later admitted that those years taught her the art of transformation. If her father could not love the real Sandra, perhaps the world would love someone else entirely. Perhaps she could create a version of herself so compelling, so irresistible, that no one would ever want to leave her again. It was a dangerous bargain to make with fate. But desperate hearts rarely read the fine print. By her early 20s, Sandra knew with absolute certainty that she had to escape. Shelbyville had given her life, but it could not contain the fire burning within her chest. Hollywood called to her like a siren song, promising everything her small-town existence could never provide: fame, fortune, and perhaps, if she was lucky, the love and acceptance that had been denied to her since childhood. In 1967, at 23 years old, Sondra Locke packed her bags and left Tennessee behind. She was not running toward Hollywood so much as she was running away from everything that had hurt her. The abandoned little girl, the radio announcer, the small-town dreamer, all of these identities would soon be shed like old skin. In their place would emerge someone new, someone the world had never seen before. She did not know it then. But she was about to enter a machine that would chew her up and spit her out. That would give her everything she ever wanted and then take it all away. The bright-eyed girl from Shelbyville was about to become Sondra Locke, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fairy tale that began on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales would slowly curdle into a nightmare that even the darkest Hollywood screenwriter could not have imagined. For 14 years, Sondra Locke believed she had found her home in the arms of Clint Eastwood. She had traded her independence for his protection, her ambitions for his vision, and her body for his promises. But the man she loved was keeping secrets that would eventually destroy everything she had sacrificed to build. Clint Eastwood was not merely a movie star. He was an institution, a walking monument to American masculinity, whose influence extended far beyond the silver screen. Studio executives trembled at his displeasure. Directors bent to his will, and the women in his life existed in orbit around his gravitational pull, never quite touching the ground of their own destinies. Sondra had entered this orbit willingly, believing that love would protect her from the dangers that lurked in its shadows. She was wrong. Throughout their years together, Eastwood had spoken of marriage and children with the casual confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. Sondra believed him. Why would she not? He had given her roles in his films, a home to share, and what appeared to be a committed partnership. When he expressed reservations about having children, she listened. When he suggested she terminate 2 pregnancies, She complied when he recommended she undergo a tubal ligation to prevent future complications. She agreed. Each decision seemed reasonable in the moment, a small compromise in service of their shared future. But there was no shared future. There was only his future, and she was merely a temporary resident in its margins, while Sondra was sacrificing her chance at motherhood for a man who claimed to want a life with her. Eastwood was secretly fathering children with other women. The depth of this betrayal defies adequate description. She had given up the possibility of ever bearing children because he said he did not want them, while he was simultaneously creating families elsewhere. The cruelty of this deception was not merely personal. It was existential. He had stolen something from her that could never be returned, and he had done so with full knowledge of what he was taking. The year 1989 arrived like an executioner at dawn, in quick succession. The carefully constructed facade of Sondra's life collapsed into rubble. First came the devastating diagnosis: breast cancer. The disease that had claimed so many women now set its sights on her. She underwent a mastectomy, her body forever altered by the surgeon's knife. While she was still recovering from this trauma, still processing the reality of her mortality, Eastwood delivered his final blow. She came home one April evening to find the locks changed on her own house. Through the window, she could see her belongings packed into boxes like garbage awaiting collection. The man who had shared her bed for 14 years, who had promised her love and partnership, had simply decided she was no longer welcome in his life. He did not have the decency to tell her face to face. He did not offer an explanation or a farewell. He simply erased her, as casually as one might delete an unwanted file from a computer. The abandoned little girl from Tennessee had been abandoned once again. But this time, she was not a helpless child. This time, she had resources, knowledge, and a fury that burned hotter than any cancer could match. Sondra Locke decided to fight back. In 1989, she filed a lawsuit against Eastwood for palimony, seeking recognition of their long-term partnership and fair compensation for everything she had contributed to their shared life. The case was settled out of court in 1990 for an undisclosed sum. But more importantly, it included a development deal with Warner Brothers that was supposed to launch her directing career. Sondra believed she had salvaged something from the wreckage. She believed the system had finally worked in her favor. She was wrong again. The Warner Brothers deal was a phantom, a cruel illusion designed to make her go away quietly. For 4 years, Sondra submitted project after project, 30 in total, and every single one was rejected without meaningful consideration. She had been given a contract that looked legitimate on paper, but was designed from the start to produce nothing. When she finally discovered the truth, that Eastwood had arranged this fake deal specifically to silence her claims, the betrayal compounded upon betrayal until it became almost unbearable. In 1995, Sondra filed a second lawsuit, this time alleging fraud against both Eastwood and Warner Brothers. The case went to trial in Burbank Superior Court, and for 2 weeks, the dirty laundry of one of Hollywood's most powerful men was aired before the world. Witnesses testified, documents were examined, the machinery of deception was laid bare for all to see. Just as the jury began deliberations, Eastwood capitulated. In September 1996, he agreed to a settlement rumored to be several $1 million. Outside the courthouse, Sondra stood victorious but emotionally drained. She told the gathered press that her case sent a message to Hollywood that people cannot get away with whatever they want just because they are powerful. It was a statement that would resonate for decades, a precursor to movements that had not yet found their voice. But victory in the courtroom did not translate to victory in Hollywood. The industry closed ranks around its favorite son. Executives who had once taken her calls suddenly became unavailable. Projects that had shown promise mysteriously evaporated. Directors who had expressed interest in working with her received quiet warnings about the consequences of such collaboration. Sondra Locke had committed the unforgivable sin of embarrassing a powerful man, and Hollywood would make her pay for that transgression with her career. She later reflected on this exile with characteristic honesty. She said she always believed she had fans in high places, but they were not willing to put themselves on the line for her. That is very expected in Hollywood, she observed. The town protects its powerful and turns its back on those who rock the boat. Her fight might have sent a message, but it also sent her into a kind of permanent exile from the only world she had ever wanted to inhabit. The girl who had fled Tennessee seeking fame and acceptance had found both, only to have them ripped away by the very system that had created her. The year 1967 marked the beginning of Sondra Locke's transformation into someone entirely new. A friend had whispered news of a nationwide talent search for a film adaptation of Carson McCullers' haunting novel, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. The role was Mick Kelly, a teenage tomboy navigating the complexities of adolescence in a small southern town. It was as if fate had written a part specifically for the girl from Shelbyville, and she was determined to claim it as her own. There was just one problem. Sondra was 23 years old, and Mick Kelly was supposed to be a teenager. In Hollywood, such details could end a career before it even began. But the abandoned girl who had learned to conceal parts of herself in childhood now put those survival skills to their ultimate test. She would become whatever the role required, even if it meant erasing years from her own existence. On the day of her audition, Sondra arrived having bound her chest to flatten any suggestion of womanhood. She had lightened her eyebrows to appear more innocent, more childlike, and when the casting directors asked her age, she lied without hesitation, shaving a full 6 years off her birth date. To them, she was 17, a fresh discovery waiting to be molded. The deception was harmless, she told herself, a small price to pay for a dream that had consumed her entire life. She could not have known that this single lie would follow her for decades, becoming part of the mythology she could never fully escape. Against odds that seemed insurmountable, Sondra won the role. She had competed against 590 other hopefuls, each one hungry for the same golden ticket. But there was something in her audition that set her apart. A rawness and authenticity that could not be manufactured. The casting director saw in her eyes the same loneliness that defined Mick Kelly, the same desperate yearning for connection that Carson McCullers had poured onto the page. They did not know they were witnessing an autobiography disguised as a performance. Before the cameras rolled, the studio made one small adjustment. Sondra became Sondra. The first A replaced with an O for reasons that were never fully explained. Perhaps it sounded more exotic, more suitable for the marquee lights that awaited her. Whatever the rationale, Sondra Louise Locke ceased to exist at that moment. In her place stood Sondra Locke, a creation of Hollywood's image machine, a persona built on talent, determination, and a foundation of carefully constructed illusions. The Heart is a Lonely Hunter wrapped in late 1967 and premiered the following summer. Critics who expected nothing from this unknown actress found themselves struggling for adequate superlatives. Her portrayal of Mick Kelly was described as wildly honest and haunting, a performance that seemed to emerge from somewhere deeper than mere technique. Audiences were moved by her ability to convey volumes through silence, to communicate the ache of adolescent longing with nothing more than a glance. The accolades arrived with dizzying speed. Sondra Locke, the supposed teenage newcomer, received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress at the Golden Globes. She was nominated as Most Promising Newcomer, a category reserved for fresh young talents on the cusp of greatness. No one suspected that she was actually the oldest nominee in that category, a woman of 24 masquerading as a girl of 18, with the help of studio publicists who had no reason to question her story. The little white lie held firm. Oscar night, 1969, found Sondra seated in the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. Draped in a glittering gown that seemed borrowed from her childhood mirror fantasies, she was surrounded by legends, the very faces she had studied in those late-night film sessions back in Tennessee. Ruth Gordon ultimately claimed the statuette for Rosemary's Baby. But simply being present among such company felt like a victory beyond measure. A variety piece from that era noted that Locke possessed a certain mystique, an indefinable quality that left lasting impressions on all who encountered her work. Back in Shelbyville, the local newspaper marveled at their hometown girl who had achieved the impossible. In a matter of months, she had traveled from radio commercials and community theater to the red carpet of the Academy Awards. The transformation seemed complete. The wounded child had become a star. Yet Hollywood giveth, and Hollywood taketh away, with equal indifference. After her spectacular debut, Sondra discovered that quality roles were surprisingly difficult to secure. The late 1960s film industry was undergoing seismic shifts, experimenting with new styles and elevating new faces. Studios struggled to categorize this ethereal Southern actress with piercing blue eyes and a serious demeanor that defied easy classification. She was not a bombshell in the tradition of Raquel Welch, nor a conventional ingenue destined for romantic comedies. There was something androgynous about her beauty, a chameleon quality that made her fascinating on screen, but frustrating for executives who preferred their actresses in neat, marketable boxes. One observer noted that she could appear elfin and boyish or arrestingly feminine, aged or ageless, depending on the angle of the light. This uniqueness was her greatest asset when performing, but a curse in an industry obsessed with typecasting. The near misses accumulated like unpaid debts. Her management turned down the role of the troubled teenager in Last Summer without even consulting her. And Barbara Hershey claimed the part instead, earning critical acclaim that could have belonged to Sondra. She passed on My Sweet Charlie, and Patty Duke took it straight to an Emmy victory. Other coveted opportunities slipped through her fingers to actresses with more momentum or more cooperative representation. Determined to reshape her image, Sondra made a decision that shocked the industry establishment. In December 1969, she posed fully nude for Playboy magazine. Her body arranged in strategic poses that evoked a mythic sensuality for an Oscar-nominated actress. This was an audacious gamble. Overnight, the shy tomboy transformed into a sex symbol, proving she contained multitudes that Hollywood had failed to recognize. The pictorial circulated for years, and decades later, aging admirers would still mail those tattered pages requesting her autograph. Then came the role that would define her trajectory in ways she never anticipated. In 1975, she was cast opposite Clint Eastwood in The Outlaw Josie Wales. Their chemistry was immediate and undeniable, both on screen and off. within weeks of meeting. They had begun a relationship that would consume the next 14 years of her life. Sondra believed she had found her partner, her protector, and her path to lasting happiness. The girl who had been abandoned by her father had finally found a man who would never leave. She could not have been more tragically mistaken. The years following her legal victories brought Sondra Locke neither peace nor redemption in the eyes of Hollywood. She had won the battle but lost the war. The industry that had once celebrated her talent now treated her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens to those who dare challenge the powerful. The directors stopped calling. Scripts stopped arriving. The woman who had once commanded the screen alongside one of cinema's biggest stars found herself wandering through a wilderness of silence and neglect. She managed to direct 2 small films in the mid-1990s, projects so modest they barely registered on the cultural radar. Death in Small Doses was a made-for-cable thriller that came and went without fanfare. Trading Favors followed a similar path into obscurity. Neither film showcased the talent that had earned her an Oscar nomination decades earlier. They were simply survival work. Proof that she still existed in a town determined to forget her. After those quiet efforts, the directing offers evaporated entirely. Sondra retreated from the spotlight she had chased since childhood, building a life far removed from studio lots and premiere parties. The settlement money from her lawsuits provided enough to live comfortably, and she filled her days with travel, reading, and the company of a small circle of loyal friends. Most of them had no connection to the entertainment industry, and that was precisely the point. There was one unexpected gift during these years of exile. While recovering from her mastectomy in 1989, Sondra had met a young surgical intern named Scott Canine. He was 27 to her 44, but the age gap meant nothing against the genuine connection they shared. Scott moved in with her in 1991, offering the kind of gentle, equal partnership she had never experienced with Eastwood for more than a decade. They built a quiet life together, far from the tabloids that had once feasted on her pain. When they eventually parted ways around 2001, it was amicable, and Sondra always spoke of him with warmth and gratitude. On November 3, 2018, Sondra Locke took her final breath at her Los Angeles home. The cause was cardiac arrest, a consequence of breast and bone cancer that had returned to claim what it had been denied decades earlier. She was 74 years old, in a final, strange echo of the secrecy that had defined so much of her life. The world did not learn of her passing for over 6 weeks. Gordon Anderson, the man she had married in 1967 and never officially divorced, quietly handled the arrangements. When the news finally broke in mid-December, it caught many by surprise and revealed just how far she had drifted from the spotlight. The obituaries that followed were a battlefield of competing narratives. The Hollywood Reporter initially referred to her as Clint Eastwood's embittered ex, reducing her entire existence to a footnote in a man's story. The backlash was swift and furious, forcing a retraction that came too late to undo the insult. Most painfully, when the Academy Awards aired their In Memoriam segment in early 2019, Sondra Locke's name was conspicuously absent. The organization that had nominated her for its highest honor could not spare a few seconds to acknowledge her passing. Even in death, she remained in contested territory. Remember the girl from Tennessee who practiced movie star poses in her bedroom mirror? Remember the bright-eyed dreamer who devoured classic films while the rest of Shelbyville slept? Now remember the woman who came home to find her locks changed, her belongings boxed, her life erased by a man she had trusted with everything. The distance between those 2 images contains the entire tragedy of Sondra Locke. A journey from innocent ambition to devastating betrayal that spans the full spectrum of human experience. What did she sacrifice for her place in the Hollywood sun? The answer is almost too painful to catalog. She gave up 6 years of her true age, constructing an identity built on deception from the very first audition. She surrendered her chance at motherhood, terminating pregnancies and undergoing sterilization for a man who was secretly fathering children elsewhere. She traded her independence for the security of a powerful partner, only to discover that his protection was merely another form of control. And ultimately, she sacrificed her career itself, blacklisted for the unforgivable crime of demanding justice. We are drawn to stories like hers because they expose the machinery behind the magic. Hollywood sells us dreams of glamour and romance, but Sondra Locke's life reveals the gears and pulleys that operate beneath the velvet curtain. Her tragedy forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, gender, and the price of fame in a system designed to consume its brightest stars. The blame for her suffering cannot be placed on personal misfortune alone. Sondra Locke was destroyed by a system that protects the powerful at any cost. Clint Eastwood could erase her from his life and his industry because he possessed the influence to do so without consequence. Warner Brothers could offer her a fraudulent contract because no one would dare question the wishes of their biggest star. Colleagues could abandon her because aligning with the powerless offers no advantage in a town built on leverage and fear. Her story echoes forward into our present moment with haunting relevance. Decades before the hashtags and the headlines. Before women began naming their abusers in public forums. Sondra Locke stood in a courthouse and declared that people cannot get away with whatever they want just because they are powerful. She was a pioneer of accountability in an era when such stands were career suicide. The movement that would eventually transform Hollywood began with voices like hers, crying out in a wilderness that was not yet ready to listen. Let us not remember her merely as a victim. Let us remember the artist who earned an Oscar nomination with her very first film. Let us remember the director who broke barriers in an industry dominated by men. Let us remember the woman who refused to be defined by anyone else's script, who fought for her dignity when silence would have been so much easier. Sondra Locke taught us that true victory is not measured in dollars or screen credits. It is measured in the courage to tell your own story, even when the world would prefer you disappeared. If these hidden stories from Hollywood's shadow speak to you, consider subscribing and sharing this journey with others who appreciate the truth behind the tinsel.